There's this narrative we often sell ourselves about India. It's the story of the Gurugram skyline, right? The Bengaluru tech parks, the massive 6-lane expressways that are cutting through the hinterland.
The symbols of progress.
Exactly. And we look at that infrastructure, we look at the GDP charts climbing up and to the right, and we just label it all development. Simple as that.
Right.
But then if you actually sit down and open Chapter 3 of the NCERT India, People and Economy, the very first thing it does is it shatters that narrative completely. It introduces us to a woman named Rekha.
Right. It starts immediately with the counter-narrative.
Yeah.
And Rekha, she isn't in a tech park. She was born in a small farmer's family up in Uttaranchal.
Okay.
And while her brothers were, sent to school with books and uniforms, the whole package, she was kept at home to sweep floors.
Wow.
She was married young, widowed almost immediately after, found herself completely dependent on her in-laws, and eventually she migrates to Delhi, not for some high-flying career, but just to keep breathing.
Yeah.
Just to survive.
And that story, right at the beginning, it forces us to ask this really uncomfortable question, and it's kind of the whole point of this deep dive. When we point to all that economic growth, are we actually looking at human development? Or are we just looking at a kind of economic swelling?
That's a great way to put it, economic swelling.
Because for Rekha, moving to Delhi wasn't urbanization in that modern positive sense we talk about. It was just a shift from rural neglect to urban invisibility.
And that is the central tension of the entire text we are going to be analyzing today. Is development just about concrete and cash, or is it about something more? Is it about choice and capability and, well, dignity?
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something very, very specific, especially for our listeners from the Simplified UPSC by PBP community. We are taking a microscope to Chapter 3, Human Development.
And this isn't going to be just a passive summary. We're going to deconstruct what the text calls the 3 deprivations. We'll analyze that strange gender paradox you see in the rich states, and we're going to link every single concept directly to previous year questions, the PYQs from your general studies papers 1, 2, and 3.
We're going to look at why high literacy in a state doesn't always mean low poverty, why some of the richest states are, frankly, failing their daughters, and maybe most importantly, how you can structure a model answer for the mains exam using the specific keywords from this chapter.
So we're really bridging that gap between the static syllabus and what you need to do for dynamic answer writing.
Exactly. Now, before we really dive in and unravel all the data, we do have some crucial housekeeping. It's just to make sure you get the absolute most out of the session with us. If you're finding value in these deep dives, if they're helping you visualize the NCERTs in a new way, we would humbly ask you to subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
It really does support the mission. And for those of you who are capable, we also have a Patreon. Your support there, it quite literally keeps the lights on and allows us to dedicate the serious research time that's necessary for these breakdowns.
A massive shout out to all of our current supporters. You are genuinely the engine room of this whole operation. Also, please, if you can, hit that like button and leave a comment. Maybe tell us, what is your definition of development? It sounds simple, but it really helps the algorithm find other serious aspirants like you.
And what about the materials we'll be talking about, the notes and things?
Yes, great point. The free notes and the list of PYQs that we're going to be discussing today are available right now on our public Telegram channel.
Okay, so that's the free resource.
That's the free stuff. But if you want the full experience, and I'm talking about the private Telegram library, that is where the real value lies for your prep.
So what's in there?
It has all the videos in this series all in one place, organized premium notes, which are much more detailed, extra PYQs that we might not even get to today, and critically, the model mains answers that we've structured based on today's discussion.
So the application part.
Exactly. To get into that private library, just DM us on the public Telegram channel. Okay, housekeeping done. Let's get back to the text. Let's get back to this clash of ideas. Development versus human development.
Let's do it.
So the insert starts with Rekha's story to introduce a very specific phrase about development in India. It calls it a mixed bag.
A mixed bag of opportunities and neglect. It's such a polite, very academic way of describing what is, in reality, extreme structural inequality.
Right. It's not just a random mix.
Not at all. The text argues that post-colonial India has seen these huge economic achievements. We have the dams, the factories, the steel plants, all of that. But the distribution of the benefits from all that, it's been incredibly selective.
And selective in what way? What does it mean?
Both socially and spatially. So geographically, you have what the text calls developed enclaves, your metropolitan centers, which have access to pretty much everything. And then you have these vast rural areas and, the urban slums that are completely cut off from it all.
The islands of prosperity in an ocean of poverty.
That's the image, yes. And the text explicitly links this unevenness to three interrelated processes. He calls them processes of declining capabilities for the poor.
Okay, I want to slow down here because this three deprivations framework is it's gold for GS1 and GS2 answers. Usually when we think of poverty, we just think of a lack of money. It's an income thing.
Right, $1 a day, that kind of metric.
Exactly. But this text frames it as a loss of capability. So what is the first deprivation it talks about?
The first is social capabilities. It says this capability declines because of displacement and the weakening of social ties.
What does that mean in real terms?
Well, think about it sociologically. When a big dam is built or a special economic zone is zoned off and an entire village is displaced, you aren't just taking their land. That's the obvious part. You are destroying their social capital, the entire community network that acts as their safety net, the person that they borrow from, the neighbor who watches their kids, the elders who resolve disputes. All of that is just gone overnight.
So even if they get, say, some financial compensation, which is often not enough anyway, they are now socially impoverished because that whole fabric is just torn apart.
Exactly. They become atomized individuals, alone in an often hostile new environment. That is a massive capability loss. You've lost your ability to cope.
Okay, that makes sense. A loss of the ability to cope.
What's the second deprivation?
The second one is environmental capabilities. This refers directly to the ecological crisis. I mean, it's no secret that the poor are often forced to live in the most degraded environments.
What? Near the landfills, next to the open drains, under the thickest layer of smog in Delhi. They're breathing the poison. They essentially subsidize the industrial growth of the rich with their own lungs, with their own health. Their environment is actively harming their ability to live.
Which I'm guessing leads directly to the third deprivation.
It's a chain reaction. The third is personal capabilities. This is about the physical body itself. If you're suffering from social displacement, you're stressed, you're isolated, and you're living in environmental toxicity. What happens? Your health collapses.
You get sick.
You get sick. The text mentioned the increasing incidence of diseases and accidents among the poor. If your body is broken, your personal capability to work, to learn, or to live a good life is fundamentally destroyed.
So if a student gets a question in the mains on, say, poverty or inequality, the takeaway here is they shouldn't just list income statistics from some report.
Absolutely not. That's a very average answer.
They need to argue that poverty is actually the sum of these three deprivations. It's social, it's environmental, and it's personal. It's a multidimensional failure.
Precisely. And in fact, this directly addresses a previous year question from 2016 in GS Paper 1. I mean, it's almost as if the question was written from this chapter.
What was the prompt?
The prompt was, and I'm quoting here, an essential condition to eradicate poverty is to liberate the poor from the process of deprivation.
Oh, that's a tricky prompt, because the keyword is process.
Exactly. Most aspirants would just write about MG and RAGA or direct benefit transfers. Give them money.
So how do we use this NCERT framework to give a much better answer?
Well, you have to deconstruct that word process. You argue that poverty isn't just an outcome. It's not just a lack of money. It's a process of capability deprivation, just like the text says. So to liberate the poor, you don't just give them cash.
You have to stop the process itself.
You have to stop the process. You have to stop the forced displacement, which protects their social capabilities. You have to fix the sanitation and the pollution, which restores their environmental capabilities. And you have to guarantee health care, which rebuilds their personal capabilities.
Wow. That completely shifts the argument from being purely economic to a much more holistic sociological perspective. You're basically arguing that you can't buy your way out of poverty if the environment you live in and the social fabric around you are still fundamentally broken.
Exactly. That is a model answer approach. It shows deep conceptual clarity, not just rote memorization of schemes.
This shift in thinking, from just money to capability, it really parallels the global shift in how we measure progress. The text makes a point of referencing the UNDP Human Development Report of 1993.
Oh, that was a watershed moment.
Yeah.
A complete game changer in development economics. The 1993 report stated, and this was quite radical for the time, that democratization and increasing empowerment of people are seen as the minimum conditions for human development.
It wasn't about GDP anymore. It was about freedom.
It was about freedom and voice.
There's a quote from that report that I absolutely love, and the text highlights it. Development must be woven around people, not the people around development.
It just flips the entire script, doesn't it?
Hmm.
The standard model was people are fuel for the economic engine. The human development model is the economy is a tool for the people to build better lives. The economy serves them, not the other way around.
Okay, so let's look at this mixed bag in terms of some of the hard data that the text provides. It dives into economic indicators next. And even though, we should say the data is historical, it's meant to serve as a baseline, the disparity it reveals it's just shocking.
It really paints a picture of two completely different Indias living side by side. The text looks at what it calls economic attainment using GNP and per capita income. And it categorizes states into developed and poorer.
So on the developed side, who do we have?
Well, on the developed side, you have Maharashtra, Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, and Delhi, the economic powerhouses.
And the poorer states.
The usual suspects, unfortunately. Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Assam. The text notes that the per capita income in the rich states is, of course, significantly higher.
But the consumption numbers were what really caught my eye. The text mentions, and again, these are historical figures, so you should look at the ratio, not the absolute value, that per capita consumption was above rupees 690 per month in those rich states.
Okay.
But it was below rupees 520 in the poor states.
So that's a massive gap in just basic purchasing power, what people can actually afford to buy and eat month to month.
Exactly. But there's an anomaly here that's really interesting. The text points out that states like Punjab and Haryana, they have some of the lowest percentages of their population below the poverty line. So it asks the question, why them? Why were they so successful in reducing poverty?
Is it just the Green Revolution? Just a story of wheat and rice?
That's the common assumption, but the text is more specific. It's the Green Revolution, yes, but specifically the institutional changes that came along with it. The text explicitly credits employment generation and, crucially, land reforms.
That is a key distinction. It's not just about more crops.
It isn't. In Punjab and Haryana, land reforms, even with their flaws, did manage to consolidate holdings and create a much more structured agricultural economy. Compare that to, say, Bihar or Odisha, where land reforms were largely failures, leaving this vast population of landless laborers who have absolutely no buffer against destitution.
So in the Northwest, the economic growth actually did trickle down, at least in terms of basic calories and income.
Right.
Because the land ownership structure allowed it to. The benefits had somewhere to go.
In terms of income, yes. But, and this is probably the biggest pivot in the entire chapter, that income did not translate to human development in every single metric.
And this is where the story gets much darker.
This brings us to the most disturbing segment of the whole chapter, segment 3, the missing girls.
This is where the data gets incredibly counterintuitive. See, there's a general assumption in sociology called modernization theory.
Right, the idea that as a society gets richer, more urban, more educated,
it naturally becomes more liberal, more progressive, and it treats its women better. It's supposed to be an automatic process.
But the map of India, as shown in this text, suggests the exact opposite is happening in some places.
It does. The text highlights an alarming trend in the child sex ratio. That's for children aged 0 to 6 years.
Yeah.
You would expect the so-called backward poor states to have the worst ratios.
Sure, that would fit the theory.
But the text explicitly states that the decline is most alarming in the developed states, specifically Punjab and Haryana.
Wait, hold on. So the states with the highest per capita income, the best land reforms, the most development in the economic sense, they are the worst places in the country to be born a girl.
According to this analysis of the data, yes. The NCERT is very, very blunt about the causes. It attributes this to two main factors. First, the pre-existing social stigma against the girl child, this deep-rooted preference for sons.
Okay, that's the cultural foundation. What's the second factor?
The second one is the kicker. It's scientific technology.
They're talking about ultrasound machines.
They are talking about ultrasound. The logic is brutal. In a poor district in Bihar, a family might not have the disposable income or the physical access to an ultrasound clinic to determine the sex of the fetus.
But in a wealthy district in Punjab?
They have the capital. They have the clinics. They use that development, that access to modern medicine, not to save lives, but to select which lives are worth keeping.
That is just, it's chilling. It completely turns the definition of development on its head. Technology isn't a liberating force here. It's just a tool for a more efficient form of patriarchy.
It proves that economic modernization does not automatically lead to social modernization. In fact, if you don't have ethical checks and balances, it can actually weaponize regression.
And this connects directly to a couple of major previous year questions that have come up. In 2014, GS Paper 1 asked, and I'm quoting, "Why do some of the most prosperous regions of India have an adverse sex ratio for women?"
And the answer is right there in Chapter 3. You don't need to go searching for complex sociological theories. You cite the mixed bag concept from the NCERT.
So how would you frame that?
You argue that prosperity in these regions, in Punjab and Haryana, brought access to technology, the ultrasound, but it failed completely to dismantle the old, feudal, patriarchal preference for male heirs. Economic capital increased, but social equity for women either stagnated or, in this case, actually got worse.
There was another really fascinating angle on this in the 2015 GS1 paper. The question asked, how do you explain statistics that show sex ratio in tribes in India is more favorable to women than among scheduled castes?
That's a brilliant sociological question. And again, if we look at the NCERT's discussion, we see that mainstream development often carries with it the baggage of the caste system. There's a process sociologists call Sanskritization. It's where lower castes try to gain social status by mimicking the rituals and norms of the upper castes. But unfortunately, upper caste norms often involve stricter control over women, the practice of dowry, and a very strong preference for sons.
Whereas tribal societies, they're often outside of that mainstream structure.
Exactly. Tribal societies are often geographically and socially isolated from this mainstream development path. They tend to be more egalitarian when it comes to gender roles. They haven't been as corrupted, for lack of a better word, by the dowry system or the hyper-preference for male heirs that really characterizes the agricultural landed castes in the plains.
So ironically, being left behind by modern development has, in this one specific way, actually protected the status of women in many tribal communities.
In that very specific and brutal metric of just survival, of being allowed to be born.
Yes.
It forces us to ask a really difficult question. What are we actually developing toward? If development means adopting a culture that kills its own daughters, do we even want it?
That is a powerful point for an essay. Let's switch gears to something that usually does correlate with freedom and empowerment, literacy.
Literacy is the foundation, really.
Yeah.
And the text defines literacy in a way that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
It's not just, can you read the bus sign or can you sign your name on a document?
No, it's a much more profound definition. It defines literacy as freedom from servitude, bondage, and ignorance.
That's it. It frames education as an instrument of liberty. It's about gaining autonomy over your own life.
But the numbers... Here we go again. We have a massive, massive divide.
We do. The overall literacy rate in the 2001 census, which is our baseline here, was about 65.4%. But female literacy was lagging way behind at just 54.16%. But the real story, as always, is the spatial variation, the difference between states.
The Kerala phenomenon, as it's often called.
Kerala is always the outlier, isn't it? 90.92% literacy. Mizoram is also up there. Now compare that to Bihar at 47.53%.
It's literally double.
It's essentially double the literacy rate, and the pattern is quite distinct. South India generally performs much better than North India. But there's another layer the text adds regarding the marginalized groups.
Right, the gap within the states themselves.
Yes, the gap. The text notes that while the total literacy rate is rising for everyone, which is good, the gap between the rich and the marginalized sections, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, agricultural laborers, that gap has actually increased in many areas over the years.
So it's like the elevator's going up for everyone, but the penthouse elevator is moving at warp speed while the service elevator is kind of stuck between floors.
That's a perfect analogy. And this links directly to population control, which is another huge topic for the exam. There's a very strong, undeniable correlation. High female literacy equals a low birth rate.
This directly answers that 2019 GS1 question. Empowering women is the key to control population growth.
Exactly. The answer isn't forced sterilization or other draconian laws. It's to give women the freedom from ignorance that the text talks about. When a woman is educated, she has greater bodily autonomy, she understands family planning, she marries later, and she tends to invest more resources in fewer children.
The old saying, development is the best contraceptive.
Precisely. And the data from Chapter 3 proves it. You just have to compare Kerala's birth rate with Bihar's. The defining variable isn't religion, it's not geography, it is overwhelmingly female literacy.
Okay, so we've looked at economics, health, and education separately. Now let's try to bring it all together. The Human Development Index, the HDI. But the text makes a really important distinction between the UNDP's global HDI and the one that was prepared by India's own planning commission.
Yes, this is a technical nuance, but it's the kind of detail that gets you extra marks in the mains. The UNDP typically looks at the big three indicators.
Which are?
Health, which they measure by life expectancy, education, measured by years of schooling, and income, measured by GNI per capita. Simple.
But the planning commission, back when it existed, said that wasn't enough for India.
They said, that's a good start, but it's not enough for the Indian context. They argued it missed the unique social realities of our country.
So what did they add to the index?
They added indicators to capture that specific social reality. They included things like social empowerment, social distributive justice, and measures for hygiene and welfare.
That social distributive justice part is very interesting. That's basically code for caste and religion, isn't it?
It is. It's a formal acknowledgement that you can be a rich, healthy, and educated man. But if you're a Dalit living in a caste-rigid village, your actual human development is severely compromised.
How so?
You might not be able to access your rights. You might be barred from the local temple or the main water source. The standard HDI, with its broad averages, completely misses that lived reality. The Indian report tried to capture it.
So when they ran the numbers with these extra India-specific indicators, who came out on top?
Well, no prizes for guessing. The top tier is, of course, Kerala, with a score of 0.638. It's followed by Punjab and Tamil Nadu.
And the bottom tier?
Again, the usual suspects in the so-called BMRO belt: Bihar, Assam, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha. They're all at the bottom of the list.
The text then lists three main factors that influence these rankings. And I think these are what you could call the structural anchors for any essay on Indian development. If you need to explain regional disparity, you have to hit these 3 points.
Absolutely. You should note these down. The first one is historical factors. This is the long shadow of colonialism.
How did that create the disparity?
The British developed the port cities: Bombay, Calcutta, Madras for extraction. That was their purpose. They built railways to drain resources from the hinterland to the ports. We are still, to a large extent, living on that colonial map. The coastal states just had a massive head start in infrastructure, in administration, in education.
Okay, that makes sense. The historical foundation. What's the second factor?
The second is socio-cultural factors. This refers directly to human rights violations and social discrimination. The text argues you simply cannot have high human development if half your population women, or a significant percentage Dalits and tribals, are structurally suppressed. States with rigid feudal hierarchies tend to perform poorly on the HDI because they're actively suppressing the capabilities of the majority of their own people.
And the third factor?
The third is political factors. This is key. It's about the nature of the state and the level of public empowerment. Kerala's high rank isn't an accident. It's explicitly linked to its history of social movements, of successful land reforms, and a political mobilization that demanded education and health as fundamental rights, not as charity from the state.
People demanded it.
The people demanded it, and the state, over decades, responded.
This all leads us to a very forward-looking kind of question. I saw a PYQ that was looking ahead to the 2025 set, and yes, you can see the trend it asked. Distinguish between HDI and the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index, IHDI.
Yes, and this is where the NCERT text is actually ahead of its time. While Chapter 3 mostly focuses on the standard HDI, the critique that it offers, talking about social discrimination, the mixed bag, the marginalized getting left behind, that critique is essentially the argument for the IHDI.
Okay, so explain that difference for us. What does inequality-adjusted actually mean?
The standard HDI is just an average. The classic example is if Bill Gates walks into a room full of starving people, the average income of that room skyrockets into the millions.
But everyone else is still starving.
Exactly. The average completely hides the extreme inequality.
And the IHDI.
The inequality-adjusted HDI takes the HDI score and then discounts it. It penalizes the score based on how unequally those benefits of health, education, and income are shared across the population. So if a state have a high income, but it's all in the hands of 1% of the people, the IHDI will give it a much lower score.
So the NCERT text, by focusing on things like social distributive justice and the 3 deprivations, is fundamentally arguing that we need to look beyond those misleading averages.
Precisely. That is a brilliant way to frame that answer. You use the limitations that are mentioned in the text itself to justify why we need the new, better index. That's critical thinking at its best.
Okay, we have one final segment, and it's a big one. It covers the existential crisis of development, really. Population, environment, and sustainability.
The elephant in the room.
The text poses the big question, can we just keep building and growing forever?
And the answer from the text is a resounding no. It brings in the concept of the tragedy of the commons.
Could you explain that concept quickly for those who might not know it?
Sure. It's a classic economic theory. If you have a shared resource, like a common pasture for grazing, or more relevant for us, the air we breathe, or a river, and everyone acts in their own narrow self-interest to use as much of it as they can,
the resource gets destroyed.
the resource is destroyed, and ultimately everyone loses. The text lists air, soil, water, and noise pollution as these immediate common threats that are being destroyed.
So it's essentially arguing that any development that destroys the environment is self-defeating. If you grow the economy but you poison the water supply, you haven't actually developed. You've just engaged in a slow collective suicide.
And it quotes Mahatma Gandhi perfectly here. He said, "The world has enough for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed."
I love that quote. It sums up the entire sustainability movement decades before sustainability was even a buzzword.
The text contrasts two very different worldviews. First is the Western view, which is largely technological. It's the idea that, don't worry, we'll invent our way out of pollution. We'll build machines to scrub the carbon from the air.
The techno-optimist view.
Exactly. And it contrasts that with the Gandhian or Neo-Malthusian view, which is not about more technology, but about preservation, austerity, and a kind of moral restraint, living simply.
It also makes a point of mentioning the Club of Rome and their famous report, Limits to Growth.
Yes, which warned the world way back in the 1970s that infinite economic growth on a finite planet is a logical impossibility.
Now, how does this all connect to the UPSC exam? I'm thinking of the smart cities questions that came up in 2015 and 2016 in GS1. The questions were about the objectives of the smart cities mission and the specific pollution problems in a city like Delhi.
Right, and it seems like a leap, right? How do you link Gandhi to a smart city?
Well, the NCERT actually gives us the answer. It discusses the idea of providing urban amenities in rural areas. That was a key concept. The idea is to stop the massive, desperate migration that chokes cities like Delhi in the first place.
Exactly. If you provide a smart village with good schools, good hospitals, reliable internet, and local jobs, you don't need a smart city to manage millions of distressed migrants. The migration pressure itself reduces.
And regarding the pollution question specifically?
You answer it by citing the environmental capabilities deprivation that we talked about at the start. A smart city isn't smart if its citizens are dying of asthma. The text explicitly says that without checking pollution, development is a failure. So a truly smart city has to prioritize environmental capability, clean air, clean water over just having more digital connectivity or more flyovers.
So we've traveled a very long way in this chapter. From the personal story of Rekha in Uttaranchal to the high-level policy of the Planning Commission, and finally, to the global environmental crisis.
It's a very wide arc, but it's all connected.
If you had to boil Chapter 3 down to one single takeaway for a future bureaucrat who's listening to this right now, what would it be?
I think it's the fundamental distinction between growth and development.
What's the difference?
Growth is quantitative. It's a number. It's the size of the GDP. It's easy to measure. Development is qualitative. It is the expansion of human freedom and capability.
Expand on that freedom aspect a little more.
As the text says over and over, development must be woven around people. If the GDP goes up by 8%, but Rekha is still widowed, uneducated, and breathing toxic air in a Delhi slum, then we have not developed. We've just grown. Our economy is bigger, but our people are not better off.
That is the classic growth without development trap.
And that is what you, as a future policymaker, must avoid at all costs. Whether you are writing an essay for the exam or actually making policy in the field, you have to always ask the question, does this decision increase the capability and the freedom of the most marginalized person in the room?
The text leaves us with one final, very provocative thought. It describes the developed parts of India as islands of prosperity in an ocean of poverty.
That's a haunting image, isn't it?
It is. And as future administrators, as the people who will be running this country in the coming decades, that is your challenge. How do you bridge that gap? How do you knock down the walls of the enclave so that the ocean doesn't just end up drowning the island?
That is the job. It's not just about policy and files. It's about empathy. It's about remembering Rekha when you're about to sign that file.
Something to think about. All right, that wraps up our deep dive into Chapter 3, Human Development.
A very heavy, but a very necessary topic.
Absolutely. If this deep dive helped you understand Chapter 3 better, and if you feel more confident about tackling those mains questions now, please do subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. It helps us out immensely.
And if you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It really does keep the lights on and the microphones recording for these long sessions.
And don't forget, the free notes and all those PYQs we discussed are on the public Telegram channel. But if you want the model answers we hinted at, the ones that are structured with the 3 deprivations and social distributive justice keywords, DM us to join the private library.
It's absolutely worth it for your mains preparation.
It really is. Keep learning, keep questioning, and never, ever confuse growth with development. We'll see you in the next deep dive.